Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of 26.1 AI Podcast. I'm Brian Ray with my friend Don Shu. We have on our agenda today the second part of a two-part series with Matthew Rocklin and Hugo Baun Anderson, the creators of Coiled and the creators of Dask. Welcome back.
Matt and Hugo, Anaconda has giant user numbers, and from what I can discern, far more than what would be included in a so called developer survey of Python engineers of 8 million. Do you see your future in bringing a lot more people into computational proficiency and getting more diversity in their solving these problems and being a force for good in that sense? That we'll have a lot more people looking at it, examining the data, and acting on it. And kind of that median will be that human will for good.
Yeah, I actually just today I taught one of our sales guys how to use Python for the first time. He printed out hello many times. It was very exciting for him. I actually really missed that experience. I used to teach a bunch in university, and it's very gratifying to give an individual the ability to quickly automate something. Like we forget sometimes about how much tedium there is if you don't know how to program. Um, it's also great that a sales guy is learning how to program. Like that is a game changing thing. You would not have expected that, 5, 10 years ago. I think we're definitely seeing more programmers out there, and that I think is changing the way that our society runs and the way that our humans engage with information. I think we're seeing a rise in digital literacy that might be empowering as the rise in literacy that occurred a couple of centuries ago, or still occurs today in some cases. Um, I think generally humans who know how to program or know how to interpret and inspect and ask questions of data will better understand and better engage with their world. I also think what I'm actually maybe more excited about is the growth of Python beyond Python programmers. I think we're starting to see a lot of applications that target not programmers, but sort of peri-programmers. We're seeing great dashboarding utilities. One of my favorite Dask projects is a project called Napari, which is a image viewer used often in biomedical imaging. Right, they're taking the awesomeness in the Python SciPy stack and they're applying it to people who actually don't know how to program. They're applying it to sort of not data scientists, but actual lab bench scientists sitting next to a microscope. And that kind of programmers enabling non-programmers is also something I'm very excited about and really broadens a lot of our reach.
It sounds like you guys are doing some amazing stuff. Are there any other use cases on the coiled stack, at least, that you're allowed to talk about of interesting things going on? Or at least customers or anything that are really utilizing your platform, taking it to the next level?
Sure, there are tons. Hugo, do you
Yeah,
want to talk about
yeah,
maybe
I'm
Andrew
very excited. Andrew
Terry?
Terrio, who used to be at the city of Boston, running data science there, recently built an election turnout model using Dask on Coiled Cloud that is was then publicized in a series of Bloomberg articles, which was really exciting. And it blew him away how quickly he could, embarrassingly parallelize his machine learning code in particular. So that's a really exciting use case that we just saw in the past couple of weeks and incredibly relevant to what's happening in the world at the moment.
What I liked about that is Andrew was on his laptop using scikit-learn. He then needs to train. I think he was doing, like election turnout forecasts for the U.S. election, like a few days before the election. Right. This is like very timely stuff. He found Coil, pip installed Coil, started using it, was able to scale up to hundreds of machines in the cloud, accelerated that work, and then got right back into his normal workflow. And so what I loved about this, and something that I really care about with Coiled, is that it's very accessible, right? He hadn't heard about it, or he hadn't tried it until he tried it. A few minutes later, he's running with it. He scales out that one particular annoying part of his workflow, and then he goes right back to his normal experience. He didn't have to sort of lift and shift his workflow experience into a product like Databricks, which he probably wouldn't have done. He just would have sort of used less data. He would have run fewer models. He would have done whatever he could to keep working on his laptop. Coiled was able to come into his experience and have a nice positive impact. Bloomberg Media was able to publish what I'm guessing are now inaccurate models, given what we know about the election. Turnout was not as expected. But that's sort of sprinkling in the ability to scale into an otherwise normal workflow is something that I'm very excited about in terms of increasing accessibility.
And Andrew Mueller used the analogy of looking at retinas. A doctor can only look at so many retinas, but a machine learning model can look at millions a night.
Yeah, I mean, along that same theme, there's a group I mentioned, the Napari folks who do this biomedical imaging stuff. Oftentimes, they need to do deconvolution. So this is kind of like sharpening images in a very fancy mathematical way, and it's extremely slow on CPUs, but on GPUs, it's very, very fast. And so what they've found is that they'll just allocate a single GPU Dask cluster on Coiled. And then they'll just ship the images to Coiled, do deconvolution, ship them back. And that's actually quite a bit faster than running it locally. And so we never actually expected Coiled to be used for single node computation, but it just ends up being sort of the easiest way to rent a GPU and to sort of integrate that into a local experience. And that allows scientists to look at the images you're talking about, with a frame rate of 5 or 10 frames per second rather than 5 or 10 frames per minute. And that again changes the way that they
and it changes their flow with their scientific workflow and process as well. I mean, historically they would need to load this data in, let all the deconvolution, all of these like skewness and all of these things happen overnight and come back the next morning, whereas now they pop away for a cup of coffee and come back and iterate immediately. And I think that speaks to Andrew's process as well. He tweeted out, this is Andrew Theriault, who did the election turnout, the voter turnout model. He tweeted out something like, I actually didn't even have time to make a cup of coffee while I was waiting for my Coiled and Dask code to run, which we found really exciting.
How long before Coiled returns people who use computation to the interface of like the teletype remote terminals?
I think we're there.
Yeah.
You could, from a teletype remote terminal, import Coiled and run.
And that's one of the points, I think, to meet data professionals, data scientists, where they are, so they don't have to go anywhere else. Wherever you pip install something and write your Python or Pandas or whatever it is code, you can access Coiled. It's something along the lines of something Matt refers to as the principle of minimal creativity. Did I get that right, Matt? So inventing, once again, as little as possible so that people do then their normal stuff, yet have access to this large-scale computation in clusters.
Do you run into any compliance issues or HIPAA compliance issues or data security questions with that model?
We certainly run into those questions all the time. I think the particular thing we're talking about isn't any more or less concerning with HIPAA or other concerns. Certainly, data security is something that we think about and care about. And this is also why you want to go with a managed solution. We think about security at a level that almost no other in-house group will think about. Maintaining HIPAA compliance, or sort of the federal versions of those, is mostly around making sure that your processes are in place, that all the data that you're storing is secured in a sensible way, and also, more importantly, storing as little data as possible. So, I mean, let me just maybe focus a little bit on what Coiled does and doesn't do, just for a second. So, Coiled is designed to scale Python computation. We don't provide a development environment. This is what Andrew really liked about us, in that he didn't have to move his developer experience elsewhere. This is also going back to the teletype question. Coiled can be run from anywhere that you run Python. And that is actually really quite distinct relative to competitors maybe like Databricks, where they sort of own your entire space. I've actually built those systems before. They're incredibly hard to get right, and no one agrees on what the right space is to work in. So by design, Coiled very much didn't want to get into the sort of full data science developer platform. I think it's sort of not a good, it's not an achievable goal. We also don't store computation. We don't store data, right? So typically data is stored, on some cloud object store like S3. It's stored in some database like Snowflake, and Coiled and Dask are just there to, manage computation on that data and then write it back to that same data store. Um, all that computation can happen inside of your existing account. We're just calling the right Amazon command to start things up, spin them down, track them, etc. So we're a very light touch when it comes to invading the developer experience, and a very light touch when it comes to invading the sort of the data ownership problem, which is what both of your questions, Don and Brian, I think are getting to.
That's excellent. That's fantastic. Just a step forward, one thing I didn't get the complete answer on is, where do you think this is going to go when you talk about machine learning and data science? Like, jump forward 5 years from now, what are we looking at? What are we in store for? Is it an Elon Musk vision, or is it dystopic, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so Elon Musk, for background, is concerned about like general artificial intelligence, and I'm going to guess that like this group is generally not as concerned as Elon is about that particular topic. Um, I think looking at the demographics of people out there, you know, no one is using deep learning. No one is using, very sophisticated systems. People are just trying to look at data currently, and they can't. And I think that in 4 or 5 years, we're going to solve that problem, where people can successfully interrogate large, valuable, complex data sets at ease. I think that's really what I expect to happen. There will be advances in machine learning and AI, right? Voice transcription will get better. Human-computer interaction will be a lot slicker. Um, but I think really those I think are a bit more parlor tricks. I think the main thing that I'm excited about, that I am pushing for, is the ability for my parents or my sister to be able to figure out, if San Francisco will be underwater in 20 years or not, by interrogating large climate simulations, for example. And that's, I think, the much bigger
Yeah,
innovation.
I agree with Matt. And to build on it slightly, I think I get slammed every now and then on Twitter for tweeting out something like the future of data science. The majority of the future of data science will happen in GUIs or something stupid like that. But I actually do mean that, and I don't mean that all data scientists will be working in. I think a lot of people will be writing code, but we'll have a huge, incredible long tail of lots of people who aren't quote unquote data scientists, but they're working with data, doing it in drag and drop interfaces and graphical user interfaces and more intuitive spaces. I'm actually really interested in the future of voice control for data science and these types of things. That may be 10 years off, more than 5. But I do think, as Matt spoke to, the democratization of this type of tooling is incredibly important, and the front end of this type of tooling. The other thing I want to speak to, let's move pivot, get a bit of whiplash going back to people writing code. What type of tools will they be using? Because we've seen a big movement of open source. Now we're seeing a big movement that the productization of OSS and the data tooling space is incredibly crowded. We have behemoths, as you mentioned, such as Databricks, which may serve very large scale organizations, but I don't think necessarily serves individual data scientists who need to move incredibly nimbly and use cutting edge technologies all the time. So I know Matt agrees with me. Envisage a not so distant future in which people can take best of breed products like Coiled and Plotly and these types of things and combine them, kind of this modularity of tooling for technical people to build out all their cool stuff and their data workflows.
Well, I wonder if we're already there mathematically. If you look at the users of Python, I imagine a lot more people, or if it's not already there, it'll get there, commit their code in notebooks, and it's not in Git or an IDE.
I'd say there's a mix. I don't think that notebooks are the future. I think that heterogeneity is the future. But it's exciting seeing all of that sort of creativity, and they're also starting to blend, right? VS Code runs notebooks these days.
Well, I think we're way past time, but since we have two people, I think going double time is appropriate, right? Is that how it works, Don?
Yeah, well, we haven't even really gotten to startups. So, I mean, one
Okay,
question
let's
I have
do a
is,
couple of questions of startups,
yeah.
and then let these gentlemen go have turkey or get ready for turkey.
Um, so Dask already has some amazing enterprises using it heavily. I think I saw a story about Walmart.
Mm-hmm.
For a startup like yours, how big of a boost is that in having a prospect list that come from the open source project you created?
Yeah, no, it's huge. I mean, there's large enterprises as you're talking about, but there's also I think the Python Software Foundation survey said that like 5% of Python users use Dask today. That's biased because that group is probably more technical than your average user, but still, that includes all developers. I think Spark is somewhere at like 13%. So we have a huge sort of grassroots user base. Taking off my open source hat and putting on my sort of for-profit company hat, my question now is how to turn that user base into a customer base, right? Dask is sort of unique in how large it is, despite not having been productized in the past. We've sort of just been a community project. So yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's uh, the sales conversations that we have are just fun. They say like, oh, great, you know all the problems that I want to solve. You solve all those problems. Where do I sign? People are very, very happy to give up the kind of we have a very strong empathy with our users already from knowing a bunch of stuff, and we know them all, and they are just very, very happy to work with us. So it's I feel like I'm cheating in making this company.
Well, investors love to hear that. So good on you.
I mean, regardless of investors, I love to hear that we're making an actual company, right? It's very exciting the kind of outreach we can do and the kind of response that we can
Yeah,
get.
and I'll
So it's good.
I'm 100% confident you guys are gonna nail it
appreciate
with this
that.
coiled. I
The
think it's
proof will
amazing.
be in the pudding. I will build on what Matt said slightly by, I don't know if I'm overreaching here, but Matt does half joke that he never really wanted to start a company, but people are like, come on, man, like we really need this stuff. We need productized Dask and distributed compute. And that I really that being in a situation where there's already demand, that doesn't necessarily it doesn't make the job simple by any means, but it is a signal, that it's important that the demand is already there as well. Particularly, in an industry where we have directors of demand generation, right? So we need that, of course. But the fact that there is demand already there is incredibly heartening.
Yeah, maybe to sort of expand on what I mean there, like the sort of the common story that we have is that there's a small data science group inside of some company. Maybe it's a data company, maybe it's a fashion company, um, and they're using Dask today, and they really like it. And there's one person who is sort of the first Dask user, and they're now also like the cloud ops person, right? And they've like figured out enough of the cloud to run Kubernetes and Dask on top of Kubernetes. They're not doing it quite right. Like they know they're sort of burning, 3 times as much money as they should be burning. And they're also like burning about a quarter of their time maintaining it. They see us, they say, oh great, that's exactly what I want. You're a bit cheaper overall because you're more efficient, and I get to stop doing this thing that I don't like doing anymore. Um, and they're all very, very happy to see us. And that story we just see over and over and over again. Um, I think that Dask as an open source project kind of reached the limit of growth without having a product company like Coiled around it. It was hard and awkward for groups of people to use the project in any sort of sensible, secure, convenient way.
That's a good transition to a question I want to ask about what about your audiences now? In terms of you had a community of open source users, committers. Now you have customers and investors. How much do they align? Where is there some kind of um, finessing or kind of education going on? Explain people what the dynamics have changed and why it's good for the sustainability of the software that they love.
That's a great question. I think a question that a lot of companies in this open source space struggle with today. I think that we're actually pretty blessed in that all of those groups already sort of understand each other a bit, and they're already pretty well aligned. So let's take a few different combinations of that. So open source and commercial, like actually a lot of Dask was built under commercial contracts. Like we did a lot of support work in Continuum and Anaconda and NVIDIA. We built up a lot of these capabilities for customers that ended up benefiting the open source community. Turns out that like hedge funds and climate scientists actually have kind of the same problems, and one group pays, the other group benefits. In terms of messaging, it can be kind of interesting sometimes. So like Hugo and I sometimes have long conversations about, can we say this? Can we not say this? Do we tweet this out with the Dask Twitter handle or with the Coiled Twitter handle? Which persona are we taking on here? And we do need to be careful around that, I think. And the developer community and I talk a lot about that relationship and making sure that we do that well. There are other companies in the space, in different spaces that sort of do that less well. I think we do a pretty good job there. Investors, I think, are pretty happy. We're sort of this weird golden child where we have this amazing usership already. We're in this very exciting space. They want us to serve this exciting space. I think everyone's pretty well aligned right now. We serve a need of sort of deployment and sort of support around Dask that everyone agrees it is right to pay.
And it's also, I was just going to add, for investors, it's also the unsexy, sexy stuff. Like everyone's hyping about machine learning and AI, but data infrastructure is actually incredibly sexy for investors. And for data, because it's attractive for organizations and data scientists and data engineers.
Where I would maybe anticipate a little more tension is in the future when some competition around Dask arises. Right. So I believe one of the major clouds is actually building like a Dask competitor internally. A few of them have tried historically. They don't actually succeed most of the time.
Do you know who it is? Are you allowed to say? Is this secret? Top secret?
I'm going to pass on that one. I don't know for certain who it is.
Okay.
Well, Matt, if you want to do founder commiserating, I can introduce you to Brian LaRoe. He's doing a serverless startup called Begin. And he's like the BDFL of JavaScript with the Linux Foundation.
Yeah.
So that for him, it's a real constant anxiety.
Yeah. Well,
does JavaScript have structure?
Let me dive into that for a second. And so, and that's fine. Again, like large companies have tried doing this in the past. You actually need a lot of like cultural understanding in order to do this well. And the clouds have historically not had that understanding. They build like like if you look at AWS, like the API is not the greatest for data scientists. They're not very good at that culturally. But I think that some tension might arise, and I think Databricks went through this, where other groups start competing, and now like the key that we hold is the deep understanding of Dask, right? I can do things with Dask that nobody else can do, and so now I'm incentivized to now make a better Dask that is not open source. And it's at that stage, which happens in 2 or 3 years, where I think that tension becomes a lot bigger. Right. And so how do we incentivize things such that Coiled is still just supporting Dask and not trying to sort of like proprietarize it, which is what you see with Databricks, right? Databricks internally does not run Spark. They run some very like tricked out version of it, which gives them a lot of advantages over Amazon and over Azure and over other groups. And so I think once more success comes, that's where
I'll also add that there is a tension that
we're not there yet.
In terms of building a startup based around OSS for someone like yourself, Matt, like working with you and seeing you explore the tension between being a contributor and maintainer of Dask and wearing your Coiled hat and seeing those different sides of you is very interesting because you have another incentive structure outside Coiled as someone who loves OSS and wants Dask to be highly successful as well, right? So you have multiple incentive structures.
Yeah, and those are all sort of captured today. Hopefully, I still remain
Absolutely. Yes.
control of the company to the distant future. But yeah, right now everything is fine. I think in 5 years it might be a different story,
Yep.
and that's where I think we need to start planning ahead.
Okay, well, I think this has been a fantastic episode, and I want to be conscious of your time. We've already been on for over an hour. So, is there anything to leave behind regarding, how to reach you or how to contribute, or any sentiment from you, Matt and Hugo?
Yeah, so you can reach me. I'm mrocklin at Twitter, MROCKLIN. But you should really just go to coiled.io. Or if you want to, just pip install Coiled, import Coiled, and then create a Coiled cluster. And you can literally be running distributed computations, before Hugo finishes whatever it is he's going to say. Our on-ramp time is around 2 minutes.
You can also reach out to us at hello@coiled.io, and that'd be great if you take the product for a test drive. Our product's in beta, and it's currently free. So spin up some Dask clusters, Coiled clusters, and let us know how you go. And we'd love it if you got in touch.
I want to add, visit all the material. The content is great. Science Thursday is wonderful. I shared one episode with my friend. She's a data engineer at Nike. And I was assuming that they're not on AWS. So it was tips on how to get Dask working on Google Cloud
Awesome.
platform.
And yeah, and all of the stuff, like if you follow us on Twitter at CoilledHQ, all the evangelism and fun initiatives we do with the community, which I mean, Matt and I love doing this so much, chatting with community members and chatting with having an audience for that as well. So join us for all of that by following us on Twitter also.